I sat through my own surprise birthday party, knowing the woman who planned it had been sleeping with my husband for 4 months, not suspecting, not wondering, knowing. With a voice memo on my phone, saved in 3 places, time-stamped 11:07 p.m. the night before, 4 minutes and 52 seconds of audio so clean you can hear the ice shift in my glass on the counter 20 feet away. Knowing with the particular, bone-deep certainty of someone who has already made the private decisions and arrived anyway, because I had things I needed to see, and because the yellow dress I was wearing looked incredible on me, and I had spent 15 years letting Brianna take things that belonged to me, and I was not going to let her take this too. But let me start at the beginning, or close enough to it. My name is Olivia. I'm 34 years old. I work in marketing strategy for a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties and mostly involves a lot of spreadsheets and the management of other people's panic. I have a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building with a broken elevator that has been broken for 8 months. I have a beagle named Fig who weighs 19 pounds and sleeps like she's been sedated. I have a husband named Daniel, who I have loved in various configurations and intensities for 6 years, and until 11 months ago, I had a best friend named Brianna. I want to be precise about that word, best friend. I want to be precise because I think we use it carelessly sometimes, the way we use words like always and forever, without really weighing them. A best friend is a specific thing. It's the person who gets the call before the post goes up. It's the person whose opinion you seek before you've fully formed your own. It's the person whose judgment you have folded so deeply into your own thinking that, after enough years, you can't always tell where their voice ends and yours begins. That's what Brianna was to me, or what I believed she was. And the distance between those two things, between what I believed and what was real, is what this story is actually about. I met Brianna the first week of sophomore year. I want to be clear. We were not freshman year friends. Freshman year, I was shy and overwhelmed and mostly existed in a radius of about 200 feet around my dorm room. Sophomore year, I moved into a new building, a crumbling, under-maintained rectangle of cement that the university described in its brochure as a community-centered living environment, which meant the walls were thin and the common room smelled like microwave popcorn, and someone on the 3rd floor played guitar badly every Tuesday night. Brianna lived 2 doors down. I met her in the hallway on a Sunday morning in September, both of us in sweatpants, both of us going to the same communal bathroom, both of us carrying the same brand of face wash. She looked at my bottle, looked at hers, and said, "I've tried 7 cleansers this year, and this is the only one that doesn't make me look like a tomato." I said same, and somehow that was enough. By October, we were sharing a dining hall table every morning. By November, we were each other's emergency contacts on the university health form. By the time we graduated, I had her parents' home phone number memorized, had spent 3 Thanksgivings at her family's house in Connecticut, had a nickname she'd given me sophomore year that I still answer to, and I'm not going to repeat here. 15 years. That's what I'm describing when I say best friend. Not a casual intimacy, not a convenience, something that had weight and history and texture. Something I had trusted completely and without examination because it had never once given me a reason not to, or so I had believed. Daniel came later. I met him 4 years ago at a work event, the kind of mandatory corporate thing where everyone stands in a rented room holding a drink they don't want and waiting for a socially acceptable moment to leave. He was near the exit, leaning against the wall with the expression of a man running quiet calculations about escape routes. I recognized that expression because I was wearing the same one. We ended up outside on a fire escape, talking about nothing for a few minutes, and then somehow everything for 2 hours. He told me about growing up in a small town in Ohio. I told him about my mother's habit of keeping every piece of mail she'd ever received, a habit she could not explain and did not try to. We talked about the jobs we'd wanted as kids. He'd wanted to be an ornithologist. I'd wanted to be a cartographer. Neither of us had become those things, but we both still thought about maps and birds more than was probably professionally useful. By the time someone came out looking for me, I had already decided, without quite saying it out loud to myself, that I was in a significant amount of trouble. We dated for 2 years. We moved in together after 14 months. He proposed 18 months after that on a Saturday morning in the kitchen with no announcement and no setup. He was making eggs. I was reading something on my phone. He turned around and said simply, like it had just occurred to him, and not like he'd been carrying the ring in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks, "I want to do this forever, with you, just like this." And the ring was in his hand, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. Brianna was the first person I called. I remember this clearly. I remember where I was standing in the kitchen doorway, still in my pajamas, still with the ring on my finger, feeling new and slightly unreal, calling her before I had even fully processed what had just happened. She answered on the second ring, and she screamed. Actual, genuine, high-pitched screaming that made Daniel look up from the stove with alarm. She cried. She asked to hear the story 3 times. She drove 40 minutes to our apartment that afternoon to see the ring in person and brought a bottle of champagne she'd stopped at 2 places to find because she wanted a specific label. She held my hand and looked at the ring and said, "Liv, I am so happy for you." And her eyes were wet when she said it. That was 11 months before my birthday party. I want you to sit with that for a moment. 11 months between the champagne and the backstab. 11 months between the wet eyes and the phone call I heard through the cracked door. I find myself, even now, trying to locate the exact point of transition, trying to find the seam where the real thing ended and the performance began, and I can't find it, which is either a testament to how good she was or a testament to how much I wasn't looking. She volunteered for maid of honor before I had asked. She threw herself into the wedding planning with an energy I had read completely and genuinely as devoted devotion. She had opinions about the venue, strong ones. She had opinions about the flowers and the catering and the invitation font and the rehearsal dinner timeline. She steered things consistently, away from what I had said I wanted and towards something that felt slightly more like her. I told myself she had better taste. I told myself she cared more about getting it right than I did about the specifics. I told myself the faint, persistent unease I felt in certain planning meetings was just pre-wedding anxiety, normal human nervousness about a major life change. I told myself a lot of things. I noticed the way she laughed at Daniel's jokes a half-second longer than she needed to. I noticed the way she touched his arm when she made a point, not dramatically, not in a way I could have named without sounding paranoid, but consistently, every time. I noticed that in every group photo, she had positioned herself next to him. I noticed that she had suggested twice, in the months before the wedding, that Daniel and I should spend a little time apart in the lead-up, just to make the reunion sweeter, and that both suggestions had come with offers to keep him company at events I wasn't attending. I noticed all of this, and I dismissed it all, because she was my best friend, and doubting her felt uncomfortably close to doubting myself. If she was performing, then I had been fooled for 15 years. If she was performing, then the person I had called at every major juncture of my adult life, every grief and every joy and every confusing in-between, had been watching me the whole time from some other angle. That was a thought I couldn't hold for very long without it destabilizing something fundamental, so I didn't hold it. I set it down every time it surfaced, and I kept going. We got married in April. Small ceremony, 32 people, a restaurant with a garden courtyard that was Brianna's suggestion, and that I genuinely loved. She stood next to me in a green dress and cried during the vows. Daniel's best man gave a toast that made everyone laugh. My mother danced until her feet hurt. I ate 3 pieces of the cake, which was lemon with a lavender buttercream, and I was so happy that particular day that it felt almost too large to be real. The kind of happiness that sits right at the edge of fear. We came back from our honeymoon in late April. Daniel went back to his job, coaching soccer at a high school 20 minutes away and doing part-time consulting for a sports analytics company. I went back to mine. We settled into the life. The ordinary, specific, largely unremarkable life of 2 people who have decided to be each other's permanent arrangement. Coffee in the morning, the cabinet doors he always left open, Big sleeping in a patch of afternoon sun on the couch, Sundays at the farmer's market, arguments about whose turn it was to do the laundry that were never really about the laundry. I was happy. I want to be clear about this. Not the performed version of happy, not the kind you describe to other people to reassure them or yourself, but the real kind, the quiet, baseline kind that doesn't announce itself, but that you'd notice immediately if it were gone. I was happy, and apparently, 4 months into my marriage, someone in my life had decided that was something they needed to correct. I found out on a Thursday night in November. My birthday is in November the 14th, which falls on a Thursday this year, but fell on a Friday that year, and Brianna had been planning the party for weeks. I knew a party was in the works. Brianna was not subtle about it, or maybe she was, and I just wasn't reading the right signals. There had been calls with Nadia that went quiet when I walked in. There had been a question about whether I had plans on Friday evening that she'd asked with slightly too much casual energy. I had played along because that's what you do. You pretend not to notice because the pretending is part of the gift. The performance of surprise is the thing you offer in exchange for the effort they've made. Thursday night, I went to bed early. Daniel said he had to finish some consulting work, and he'd be up later. I read for a while, one of those long novels with 50 characters and 3 competing timelines that I tend to get deeply absorbed in for 2 weeks, and then forget entirely. And at some point, I fell asleep. I woke up at 11 p.m. for no particular reason, the way you sometimes do, suddenly and completely alert, like your brain has been waiting for a quiet moment to surface. I was thirsty. I got up to get water. The kitchen is at the back of our apartment. It has a door that opens onto a small back landing, concrete steps down to the building's rear lot where the dumpsters live, and I leave this door cracked in cool weather because I like the air. I had left it cracked that night. I remember noticing it on my way to the sink, the thin line of cold and the smell of November coming through the gap, and then I heard her voice, not coming from inside the apartment, from outside, from the landing. She was on the phone. I knew her voice the way you know the voices of people who have been close to you for a long time, not just the sound but the texture of it, the particular cadence she used when she was relaxed and unguarded. She wasn't being quiet. She had no reason to be quiet. She was outside, in the dark, on my back landing, and she thought everyone in the apartment was asleep. I stood at the kitchen sink and I listened. She was describing the venue layout. The back room at Oleander, the tables, the arrangement, where the bar was positioned relative to the entrance. She used the word perfect twice. She mentioned the time the guests should arrive, 6:45, to be seated before me. She mentioned Nadia by name, said Nadia had handled the invitations. She mentioned the dress she was going to wear. And then she said Daniel's name, not in the context of the party, not in the context of Daniel will be seated at table 2, or Daniel is in charge of getting her there on time. She said his name in a sentence I am not going to repeat verbatim because I have told this story enough times now that I've gotten careful about the specific words. Careful in the way that Patricia, my attorney, suggested I be, but the meaning was clear. The meaning was that whatever was happening between them, she expected it to be easier once this was over, once the party was done, once whatever obligation or performance was required of her in the role of best friend to me had been discharged. Then she laughed, soft, low, relaxed, the laugh of someone having a conversation they are comfortable in, the laugh of someone who is not afraid of being overheard. I stood at the sink for 30 seconds without moving. I know it was 30 seconds because I counted, not deliberately, not as a technique. I counted because my brain needed something mechanical to do while the rest of it processed what I'd heard. 1, 2, 3. The cold from the cracked door, the weight of the glass in my hand, the sound of figs shifting on the couch in the other room. 30. Then I set the glass down on the counter, very carefully, and I went back to bed. Daniel was still in the office. The door was closed. I could hear, faintly, the sound of typing. I lay down in the dark. I pulled the blanket up, and I thought, this is the part of the story where people expect the crying, the screaming, the dramatic confrontation at midnight, throwing things, voices raised, the whole operatic mess of catching someone in a betrayal. And I understand that expectation. I have had it too, in the abstract. I have watched enough movies and heard enough stories to have a template for what this moment is supposed to look like, but that's not what happened. What happened is that I lay in the dark, and I was very, very quiet and very, very still, and I planned. I don't know exactly when it happened in my life, the shift from reacting to planning. I think it has something to do with being the eldest child, with being the person my family defaulted to in a crisis because I was the one who could hold the panic in check long enough to identify the next step. When my father broke his leg the summer I was 12, I was the one who called the ambulance and then called my grandmother and then made sure my younger brother had dinner while my mother was at the hospital. I was 12. Not because I was exceptional, but because someone had to, and I was the one who could. That wiring doesn't leave you. In a crisis, something in me goes very quiet and very focused, and the panic, whatever panic exists, gets tucked into a drawer for later. I lay in the dark and I thought about what I knew. I knew what I had heard. I knew I needed to hear it again, and more completely, and on record. I knew that the party was tomorrow. I knew that Brianna had been planning it for weeks and had her own role very clearly mapped out in her mind. I knew that Daniel was 15 feet away behind a closed door, and that whatever happened with Daniel was a longer, separate conversation that was going to require a different kind of stillness than I had right now. I thought about what I needed, documentation, first. I needed whatever was said on that back landing on record before another 12 hours passed. I got out of bed. I took my phone into the bathroom, the one off the hallway, farthest from the office, and I sat on the closed toilet lid in the dark, and I opened the voice memo app, and I pressed record, and I set the phone face up on the edge of the sink, and I walked back into the hallway and stood near the kitchen door. She was still out there, still on the phone. I don't know for how long she'd been there. The conversation had shifted slightly. She was talking about logistics, times and places, and the movement of people, and then she circled back, said something about the past few months, about how careful she'd been, about how much easier everything would be after the weekend. I stood in the hallway in my socks on the cold wood floor, and I listened, and I did not make a sound for 4 minutes and 52 seconds. Then the conversation ended. I heard her footsteps on the landing, the soft click of the door she'd been leaning against, and then silence. I went back to the bathroom, stopped the recording, played back 30 seconds of it to check the audio quality. Clean, completely clean. You could hear her voice clearly, the cadence, the specific words I needed. You could hear very faintly at the edges, the ambient sound of the building, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car on the street below, but her voice was clear. I saved it. I saved it to the phone. I saved it to my cloud backup. And then I opened my email, and I sent it to myself at my work address because that server has different backup protocols than my personal one, and I have, in various professional capacities, seen enough to know that you want documentation in more than one place. Then I went back to bed. Daniel came to bed around midnight. I kept my breathing even and my eyes closed, and I lay beside him in the dark, and I thought about 6 years of a life I had believed in completely, and whether any of it was what I had thought it was. And I did not cry, and I did not speak. And in the morning, I was up before him, and I had coffee made, and my phone in my hand, and a list on the notes app of everyone I needed to call. The first call was to Nadia. I want to tell you about Nadia because Nadia matters. Nadia Ose is 36 years old and has been my friend since we worked together at my first job out of college, a small firm that no longer exists. She runs a nonprofit now, 7 years in, that provides workforce training for formerly incarcerated women, and she operates it with calm, methodical precision that makes you understand why certain people are given hard jobs. She is not an excitable person. She is not a dramatic person. She is the person you call when you need something done. She answered at 6:47 a.m. I could hear from the background sound that she was already up, already moving, the low sounds of a morning routine in progress. I need to tell you something, I said, and you need to listen to all of it before you say anything. There was a pause. Okay, she said. I told her everything. I played her the audio through the phone. I heard her breathing change, just slightly, the way breathing changes when someone is working to keep their expression neutral under pressure. When the audio ended, there was silence for a long moment. Then she said, tell me what you need. I love Nadia for many reasons. This is one of them. Here is what I needed. I needed the party to happen because I needed to see what happened when it happened, and because canceling it meant tipping Brianna off, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. But I needed control of the situation. I needed to know who was where and when. I needed to have the people I trusted in the right positions, and I needed, if possible, to have a version of the evening on record. Nadia said, I can have Sarah there early with her phone. Sarah Chung is my coworker. She had made once a quiet comment about Brianna, something about her feeling like a performance, and I had brushed it off with the particular briskness of someone who doesn't want to hear a true thing. I called her at 7:38 a.m. She listened to the audio without saying a word. When it ended, she said, I'll be there at 6. Where do you want me? The venue was a restaurant called Oleander, back room, reserved under Nadia's name, because Brianna had insisted on booking it that way for the surprise to work. I called the manager at 7:55 a.m. Her name is Diane Farrow, and she and I had worked together briefly years ago when I did a marketing contract for a restaurant group she managed. She owed me, in the informal but real currency of professional favors, a significant debt from a situation involving a botched event and a reputation I had helped protect. I called in that debt at 7:55 on a Friday morning in November. Here is what I asked her. I needed a secondary venue, same evening, same time, private room, enough for 28 people. I needed it set up identically or close enough, flowers, a table arrangement, the works. And I needed, if someone called asking about the Oleander reservation, for her to redirect them, calmly and without drama, to the new address. Diane was quiet for a moment, then she said, Kettner's, 2 blocks over. I'll call them right now. I owe you one. She owed me several, actually, but I was not going to say that. By 8:30 a.m., the real party had been moved to a private dining room at Kettner's, a place I had eaten at twice and liked both times. The guest list had been quietly rerouted by Nadia, who spent 40 minutes on the phone, personally reaching each guest and explaining the change. Venue only. Same time. Don't mention it if you run into anyone unexpected. She did this with the efficiency of someone who has spent 7 years coordinating sensitive information about vulnerable people and understands the stakes of a leak. Daniel had not been told. His name stayed on the Oleander reservation. His invitation had not been updated. If he called Diane to confirm, she would give him the old address. If he arrived at Oleander looking for a party, he would find an empty reserved room and a manager who had been briefed to say there must have been a miscommunication. Here is the information I have, and hand him a card with nothing useful on it. I did not feel good about this part. I want to be honest. I did not feel clever or powerful or any of the things people seem to want you to feel when you describe an act of strategic retaliation. I felt like someone who had been awake since before dawn, making logistics calls in an effort to survive a betrayal that was still, in some part of my brain, impossible to fully believe. I felt like someone running on the narrow, focused energy of crisis, which is different from strength and different from anger and doesn't feel like anything you would choose. But I kept going, because stopping was not an option and falling apart was not an option, and the only thing left was forward. My attorney's name is Patricia Sohn. She has been practicing family law and civil litigation for 22 years. I know Patricia because she handled a situation for a former colleague that I had witnessed from a professional distance, and she had conducted herself throughout with a combination of precision and humanity that I had filed away as, this is someone I would want in my corner. I called her at 8:45 a.m. I said, I need 20 minutes and I need your honest assessment of a recording I have. She said, I have a 9:15 cancellation. Come in. I was in her office by 9. Patricia Sohn is 53 years old, with gray-streaked hair she keeps short and a manner that sits exactly at the intersection of warmth and precision. Her office has 2 windows, a lot of books, and a bowl of wrapped candy on the corner of her desk that she never touches, but that she says makes people feel more comfortable. She listened to the audio with her eyes closed and her hands flat on the desk. When it ended, she opened her eyes and said, this is clean. This is usable. Do you want to know your options now or after the weekend? After the weekend, I said. She nodded. Keep documenting. She said it the way a doctor gives a prescription, clinical and clear. Every relevant contact, every communication, every deviation from normal behavior, date and time, everything. Don't alter your own behavior in a way that would suggest poor knowledge if you can help it. And call me Monday. I said I would. She walked me to the door. And then just before I left, she said, in a tone that was slightly different from the professional one, softer and more personal, how are you holding up? I thought about it for a moment, actually thought about it rather than giving the reflexive fine. I said, I don't think I've gotten there yet. She nodded like that was the correct and expected answer. Monday, she said again. I went home. I showered. I did my hair the way I do it when I'm trying to feel deliberate about the day. Not elaborate, just the specific effort of someone making a choice. I put on the yellow dress. I had bought it in September, on a Saturday, at a small shop near our apartment, and when I'd tried it on, Brianna had said, without hesitation, Liv, you have to get that dress. You look incredible. I had worn it 3 times since. It fit perfectly. It made me feel like myself, which was a thing I needed more than I had expected. Daniel was home when I came out of the bedroom. He was in the kitchen making lunch, and he looked up when I walked in and said, you look nice. Dinner plans? There it was. The specific, practiced casualness of someone who knows where you're going and is pretending not to know where you're going. I had been rehearsing for this moment in my head all morning, and now that it was here, I felt nothing dramatic. Just a kind of clarity, a kind of distance. I said, Nadia wanted to try that new place on 5th. I'll be back late. Don't wait up. He said, have fun, and turned back to the counter. I stood there for 1 extra second, looking at the back of his head, at the cabinet door he'd left open above the sink, the one I'd asked him to close approximately 400 times in 6 years, at the ordinary, unremarkable kitchen of a life I had believed was mine. Then I picked up my bag and walked out. I arrived at Kettner's at 6:15. The room was already set. Diane had been right. It was close enough to what the Oleander setup would have been. Round tables with white cloths, the specific floral arrangements Brianna had ordered, which Nadia had quietly redirected to the new address, a small bar setup along one wall. The flowers were white and cream and pale green, Brianna's choice, and they were beautiful. And I stood in the doorway of this room for a moment and felt the full, strange weight of it, that someone could make something this beautiful for you as part of something this terrible. Sarah was already there. She was at the bar with a glass of sparkling water and her phone face up on the counter. She looked at me when I walked in, did a quick scan from dress to face, and said, you look like you've already won. I said, I don't feel like it. She said, that's fine. You just have to look like it for a few hours. I said, I know. She paused, then quietly, I'm sorry, Liv. I'm really sorry. I said, me too. Can we not do this part right now? She said, yes, absolutely. Go talk to Nadia. Nadia was near the entrance, managing something on her phone with the focused efficiency of someone coordinating a small operation. She looked up when she saw me, said nothing, just crossed the room and hugged me, briefly and firmly, the way she does things. Then she pulled back and looked at my face. "You're good," she said. It was not a question, it was an assessment. "I'm good," I said. She nodded. "They're all coming. Everyone I reached is coming here. One guest didn't get the message in time. He might go to Oleander first, but Diane will redirect him." "And Brianna?" I said. Nadia's expression was careful. "She doesn't know. She's getting ready at home. I saw her last message to the group chat. She sent a reminder about the start time at 5:30. She thinks everything is on track." "Right," I said. "Because it is." The guests arrived between 6:30 and 7, 26 of the 28, which felt like enough. My mother came with my aunt, who she'd called that afternoon to come as a surprise. My brother Marcus showed up with his girlfriend and a bottle of wine, and the expression of a man who has been briefed on a classified situation and is taking it seriously. My coworkers came in a group. There were hugs and the specific warm chaos of a party coming together. People finding each other, drinks being poured, the volume rising as the room filled. I moved through it and I smiled and I accepted the hugs and the happy birthdays, and I was present, genuinely present, because these people were genuinely there for me, and I was not going to let what was happening on the edges of the evening swallow the middle of it. At 7:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. 2 words, "She's here." And then, 90 seconds later, "On her way." I put my phone in my bag and I stood in the center of the room and I breathed, just breathed, in and out, the way you do when you need to be larger than your own nerves for a few minutes. The music was playing, something instrumental and warm. Sarah was near the door, phone at her side, casual. Nadia was at the bar, visible, easy, the anchor of the room. I watched the door. She came in at 7:22. Brianna, in a pale pink dress I hadn't seen before, something with a wrap detail at the waist that she'd clearly bought for this occasion. Her hair was down, blown out, perfect. Her makeup was precise and deliberate. She looked objectively beautiful. She is a beautiful woman. That has never been in question. She walked in with the energy of someone who has organized an event and is arriving to see it executed. That specific anticipatory forward lean of a person coming to collect something they've worked for. She scanned the room, found my face, and the smile came on. Not a subtle smile. A full, warm, genuine-looking thing. The smile I had seen 1,000 times. The smile that had, for 15 years, read to me as love. I smiled back. I held her gaze. I let the moment sit for just long enough. Then her eyes moved to the door. Just a quick sweep, the kind you can miss if you're not watching for it. Looking for someone who was supposed to be there and wasn't yet. Then back to the room. Then to the door again. Slightly more deliberate this time. I crossed the room toward her. She opened her arms and we hugged and she said, right against my ear, "Happy birthday, Liv. I can't believe you didn't suspect anything." Her voice was warm, delighted even. The voice of a woman who was very good at her performance. I pulled back and looked at her face. "You outdid yourself," I said. "The flowers are incredible." She laughed. "I had them do a test arrangement 3 times. The florist must have hated me." "I believe it," I said. I sounded easy and warm and utterly unbothered, and I watched her relax into it, visibly, some tension she'd been holding releasing slightly, as she concluded that everything was proceeding as planned. I noted this, filed it. Then I watched her eyes go to the door again. We stood together for a few minutes. She talked. I listened. She told me about the planning, the logistics, the small disasters she'd managed in the lead-up. She was charming and funny, and I stood there and I let it happen, and I watched her. Really watched her. Maybe for the first time in 15 years without the filter of trust, without the layer of assumption that everything she showed me was what it appeared to be. She kept glancing at the door. 7:30 passed. 7:40. I watched the calculation happening behind her eyes, the growing absence where something was supposed to be, the story she was telling herself about what that absence meant. At 7:45, I put my hand on her arm and I said, "Can I tell you something?" She turned to me. Her expression was still warm and attentive. "Yes, of course." "He's not coming," I said. I said it quietly, just the two of us in the ambient noise of the room. My voice even. Conversational, like I was giving her scheduling information. She looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean he's not coming." I paused just long enough. "And I think you know exactly why I know that." Something moved through her face, fast and then controlled. A flicker of something real and then the wall coming up. Practiced and immediate. She shifted slightly. Her chin came up just barely. The posture of a person pivoting to their next angle. "Olivia," she said, "I think there might be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "I was in the kitchen Thursday night. The back door was open." Her eyes changed. Not her expression, just her eyes. The particular adjustment that happens when someone is recalculating very quickly behind a face that is trying not to show it. "I heard everything," I said, "and I recorded it. 3 seconds. I counted them the way I had counted the 30 at the kitchen sink. 1, 2, 3. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. Somewhere behind me, my brother Marcus laughed at something my aunt said. The music played. Someone clinked a glass. The warm noise of a real birthday party for someone people actually loved, continuing exactly as it should, untouched and unbothered and right at the edge of it. This moment. This particular, quiet, devastatingly still moment. She said, "Olivia." Not a sentence. Just my name. Like a door she was trying to open that had already been locked. I said, "You should go." I said it the same way I had said everything else. Even. Clean. No heat. The color moved through her face or out of it. I could see the pale come up under the foundation and the highlighter and all the careful preparation she had done to be here for a party she had planned as cover for something else entirely. She stood there and she was, for just a moment, completely without her performance. Just a person in a pink dress in a room full of people who loved the woman she had betrayed, holding nothing. I turned back toward my guests. I heard, rather than saw, her move toward the door. Sarah told me me later, in the debrief, which happened 2 days after the party over coffee in my kitchen, that Brianna had stood outside the restaurant for about 4 minutes after leaving, just standing on the sidewalk, not on her phone, not moving, just standing there. Sarah had watched through the window. Then she got in a car and left. I didn't watch any of that. I was inside at my birthday party, eating the small chocolate things the caterer had made and listening to Marcus describe a construction project near his office with the particular enthusiasm he reserves for stories about things going structurally wrong. And I was underneath everything, in the specific, complicated piece of someone who has done the hard thing and is now waiting for the dust to settle. Daniel's bags were in the hallway 11 days later. That conversation was different from this one. Longer and quieter and sadder, in the specific way that endings are sad even when they are correct. He did not deny anything, which I had been prepared for and which still surprised me. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at his hands and said, "I don't know what I was thinking," which is what people say when they don't want to say the true thing, which is that they were thinking clearly and chose it anyway. I said, "I know." He said, I said, "I know." We sat for a long time. The bags went in the hallway on day 11 because Patricia needed certain things documented in a certain sequence, and I was not going to do this impulsively or in a way that created problems later. Patricia, who had listened to the recording on a Friday morning in November with her eyes closed and her hands flat on the desk, had by the following Thursday a complete documentation packet. The audio, the party record, Sarah's footage, a written timeline I had assembled with dates and specifics, and a preliminary assessment of options she walked me through with the same clinical warmth she'd brought to our first meeting. "Your position is strong," she said, "significantly stronger than most." I said, "I want this finished cleanly." She said, "That's what I'm here for." The apartment was mine. We had purchased it together, but I had contributed the larger portion of the down payment from money my grandmother had left me, and Patricia had noted from the beginning that this was a relevant detail. The settlement was not painless, and it was not fast, but it was clear, and by the time the final papers were signed, I had a home that was mine, and a dog who had already, without apparent awareness of the situation, stopped going to Daniel's side of the bed. Brianna called me 7 times in the 2 weeks following the party. The first 4 calls I let go to voicemail. The 5th, she left a message. I listened to it once. She said that she understood I was angry, which was a word that did not capture anything about what I was, and that she wanted me to understand that things were more complicated than they appeared, which was the kind of sentence that people say when they want you to do the work of inventing an excuse for them. The 6th call, I did not answer. The 7th, I let ring. She sent 3 texts. The first was the day after the party. "Can we please talk?" The second was a week later. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but please." The third, 10 days after that, "I hope someday you'll let me explain." I read the third one standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee in my hand and Fig sitting at my feet looking at me with the patient, slightly bewildered expression she uses when she cannot identify the source of my stillness. I read it twice. I set my phone face down on the counter. I drank my coffee. I blocked her number that afternoon. I have not unblocked it. There is a question I get when I tell this story, which is, "Don't you miss her?" And the honest answer is yes and no in a way that is hard to explain concisely. I miss the person I believed she was. I miss the 15 years of what I experienced as a real friendship, the 2 a.m. phone calls and the emergency airport runs and the specific intimacy of knowing someone's embarrassing stories and keeping them safe. I miss having that. I do not miss her because I don't know exactly who she is, and I'm not sure I ever did. What I know is this, that I sat through my own birthday party knowing what I knew, in a yellow dress, in a room full of people who loved me, eating small chocolate things and listening to my brother talk about structural failures and watching the candles on the tables make everything look warm and real. And that the night before, I had stood in my socks on cold kitchen tile and held an empty glass and made a decision, not to collapse, not to confront, not to do any of the things that would have required me to be smaller than I am, to be instead exactly myself, to be the person who notices everything and plans accordingly and walks into the room anyway and holds the ground. She said his name on that back step thinking no one could hear her. She made her plans thinking I was the kind of person who wouldn't notice until it was too late. She spent months being careful, being patient, being precise, and then she stood on my back landing in the dark and talked about it out loud. She was wrong about the open door. She was wrong about a lot of things, but mostly she was wrong about me. Fig is asleep on the couch right now, in the afternoon sun, feet twitching the way they do when she's chasing something in whatever dogs chase in dreams. My coffee is getting cold. In an hour, I have a call with Patricia about a final piece of paperwork that needs my signature. Tonight, Nadia and Marcus and Sarah are coming over for dinner. The kind of ordinary, real, unremarkable evening that is, when you hold it up to the light, exactly what I was protecting all along. Not the party, not the performance, not the version of the life that looked good from the outside and was running a different story underneath. Just this. The cold coffee and the twitching dog and the people who show up. She never got to take this part. She tried. She planned for it carefully, and she tried. She didn't get it.